Justice sometimes slips through the cracks, sometimes it's buried, but the truth always finds its way to the surface. A case that was closed 20 years ago has been reopened by the relentless determination of a young woman. And no one knew that this trial was not just about justice, it was about a reckoning.
According to the case files, the party requesting this retrial is the victim's daughter, Ms. Evelyn Carter. Tell me, why are you seeking to reopen this case after 20 years?
Because 20 years ago, we convicted the wrong person, and I will not stop until I find the truth.
I've already spent years behind bars for that murder. Just because new evidence has surfaced doesn't mean you get to put me on trial again.
New DNA testing has confirmed that the blood found at the crime scene does not belong to the defendant. But does that mean Robert Langston is innocent? Or was there someone else at the scene that night?
Evelyn was fighting for justice. The defendant was fighting to prove his innocence. But neither Evelyn nor the courtroom had realized the weight of the truth they were about to uncover, because the real killer might just be sitting among them. In some cases, the criminals are obvious. In others, the most dangerous ones remain silent. Silent, because every word they utter could betray them. In Evelyn's case, someone in that courtroom was holding back, because they had something to hide. But a courtroom is not a place where secrets can be buried forever. And today, that silence was about to be broken.
20 years ago, you confessed to this crime. We haven't forgotten. What changed now? Are you suddenly innocent? Are you really sitting here telling me that you've been wrongly imprisoned for 2 decades?
I never confessed, Ms. Carter. I was forced into a plea deal. They told me, admit to the crime and you'll avoid a life sentence. So I took it. But I never harmed your mother. Never.
But your DNA was found at the crime scene, Mr. Langston. Do you have an explanation for that?
I wasn't there that night. But if my DNA was, there's only one explanation. Someone put it there.
A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Jury members exchanged stunned glances. Journalists scribbled furiously. For years, Robert Langston had claimed he was innocent. But now, the possibility of someone framing him was a whole new revelation.
Don't take me for a fool, Mr. Langston. If you weren't there, then how did your DNA end up at the scene? Go on, tell me, what really happened that night?
That night, I remember hearing the door open. Someone walked in, but I never saw their face. Evelyn, I didn't hurt your mother. You have to believe me.
The defendant's phone records place him miles away from the crime scene that night. So I ask you, members of the jury, if he wasn't there, how did his DNA get there?
That is the real question, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen? If my client wasn't at the scene, how did his DNA appear there? If he was guilty, why do phone records place him somewhere else entirely? There must be an explanation, mustn't there?
The attorney's words shifted the air in the courtroom. No one saw the case the same way anymore. The question was no longer whether Robert Langston was guilty. It was something much bigger. If it wasn't him, then who was the real killer?
Are we saying someone planted evidence?
This is ridiculous. Reopening a case from decades ago won't change anything. You can't rewrite the past.
You say that, but sometimes the past refuses to stay buried, Mr. Carter.
The puzzle pieces in Evelyn's mind were starting to fit. But was she really ready for the answer? The case was spiraling into something even bigger than she had imagined. If Langston was innocent, then who had really killed her mother? And why was her father so adamant about shutting down the possibility of Langston being framed? Sometimes, the biggest secrets unravel at the most unexpected moments. Evelyn was chasing her mother's killer, determined to bring the truth to light. But what she didn't realize was that the truth was much closer than she ever imagined.
The night my mother was murdered, there was a second person at the crime scene, and that person could be here, in this very courtroom.
Ms. Carter, enough with the implications. If you have something concrete, present it now.
The hair found at the crime scene that night. It doesn't belong to the defendant, but I know exactly whose it is.
Whose is it?
The courtroom fell into a suffocating silence. Then Evelyn turned her gaze to one person, her father, and with a single name, she shattered the facade of innocence.
The DNA results are clear. The killer is right here. And that person is you, Mr. Carter.
The moment Evelyn uttered that name, the courtroom froze. Breaths were held. The man who had spent years imprisoned was no longer the prime suspect. And now, every pair of eyes in the room turned to the most dangerous man there, Thomas Carter.
Lies! This is a mistake. The test results must be wrong. DNA tests aren't always reliable. Prosecutor, where did you get this data? Who analyzed it? This is a conspiracy. You're trying to silence me.
For 20 years, I believed Robert Langston killed my mother. I had nightmares because of him. My entire life was stolen because of that belief. But now, the truth is staring me in the face. The real murderer was right in front of me this entire time. How tragic is it that a little girl once thought the safest place in the world was her father's arms, only to find out that same man was the monster who took away her mother?
I was the easy target, wasn't I? No one wanted to hear the truth. I rotted in a cell while the real killer sat at home, playing the loving father. Tell me, Thomas, how did you sleep at night? Did you ever hold your daughter and feel guilty? Did you ever look at her and see her mother staring back at you?
The evidence presented by Ms. Carter, along with the new DNA tests, has led us to an undeniable conclusion. We now have definitive proof placing Thomas Carter at the crime scene that night. These findings not only support the innocence of Robert Langston, but confirm that the real murderer is Thomas Carter himself.
The courtroom was dead silent. All eyes were on the man who had hidden the truth for decades. Thomas Carter clenched his fists, taking deep, measured breaths. There was no escape. The empire of lies he had built for years had finally crumbled, and now he had no choice but to face the truth.
This is a mistake. This can't be happening. I was only trying to protect her.
Protect me or protect your secret?
Justice is often delayed, but it always arrives, and when it does, no criminal can escape it. Today, for Evelyn Carter, this trial wasn't just about closure. It was a turning point. She had finally reached the answers she had been seeking all her life. But the real question was, could she handle the truth?
Your Honor, based on the irrefutable evidence presented, I request the immediate exoneration of Robert Langston in the arrest of Thomas Carter.
This court hereby declares Robert Langston innocent of all charges. All accusations against him are officially dropped.
Turns his gaze toward Thomas Carter.
However, a warrant is now issued for the immediate arrest of Thomas Carter. Officers, remove the defendant from this courtroom.
A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Cameras flashed as journalists scrambled to document the moment. Jury members exchanged glances. After 20 long years, Robert Langston was finally free. But for Thomas Carter, there was no escape. He was no longer just a father. He was a murderer.
For years, I blamed the wrong man, but the real killer was always here, right beside me.
I was trying to protect you, Evelyn.
In that moment, Evelyn finally understood the depth of her father's deception. The man who raised her, who she had trusted, was the same man responsible for her mother's death. Sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from strangers. It hides in plain sight, among those closest to us. And today, a chapter in Evelyn Carter's life came to an end. But this story was bigger than just her. Today, it wasn't just one woman's life that changed. Justice itself had shifted. Because she was no longer just a victim. She was the one who unearthed the truth.
For 20 years, I chased justice, Evelyn, and you finally brought it home.
Justice may be delayed, but in the end, it always wins.
And as the final words echoed through the courtroom, an era came to an end. But for Evelyn, this was only the beginning. Because the truth, while often devastating, is also liberating. Today was the day a daughter learned of the greatest betrayal by the person she loved most. But more importantly, today, justice prevailed.